Good afternoon. I'm Cedric Woods, Director for the Institute for New England Native American Studies, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to UMass Boston's first Indigenous Peoples Day seminar, panel, dialogue, conversation. I am so heartened after 11 years to be here, to be in this space virtually with all of you, my dear colleagues, Maria, Sarah, Kelly, Elizabeth, Randy, Asa, and Jane Ann. And we know that this is going to be extremely informative as you hear from elders, Native young adults who are at different stages in their life paths, but who bring so much to this topic, to our campus, and to enrich understandings of Indigenous peoples. Again, I am Cedric Woods. I'm a citizen of the Lumbee Indian tribe from North Carolina. I've been a long-term guest, first with the Pequot Mohegan peoples in Connecticut, and now of the Massachusetts, as well as their neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc relatives as well. So thank you all, and I'm now just going to give you a few technical oversights that's going to happen. We're going to have a formal opening. You will not be able to chat directly with everyone here. I'll be able to see what's going on, but not to one another. So we ask you to use the Q&A function because we have reserved time at the end of the program for question and answer, and that'll be from 4:50 to 5 p.m. Our panelists will be able to share their screens if they choose to do any presentations, and a recording will be available, and it will be on the university's YouTube channel. So it will be publicly accessible at that point in time, and we are actively recording now. So thank you for that. The timing after our brief introductory comments, my dear friends Elizabeth and Randy will share some of their perspectives as Indigenous leaders, and dare say it, given that I've crossed the 50 mark myself, Indigenous elders, even though I'm more than a little resistant to that term, and will continue to be so. And then we will definitely move into the dialogue portion of this with our Native students at UMass Boston and our Indigenous elders from both here locally at Massachusetts, as well as down in the Gulf Coast, Chitimacha, Tunica, Homa country, where Chief Randy Verdun is from. And so with that, I now turn it over to Maria.
Thank you very much, Cedric. So it is my distinct pleasure to be here with all of our wonderful panelists today. And Cedric, thank you as always for your leadership. So I am an assistant professor of history at UMass Boston. I am also the director of our Native American and Indigenous Studies program, which offers a minor in Native Studies for our undergraduates. And so my role today is I'm just here to give you a couple of technical updates as well. I'm going to be sort of observing and interacting with the Q&A function. So if you've got any questions for our panelists, please do use the Q&A function to pose those questions, and I will be monitoring that. At the end of the conversation and the panel, there will be at least 10 minutes for engagement with our panelists. So your questions will be posed to them in that time. So I'll be kind of keeping a record of the questions that do appear in that Q&A box. The other thing I should let everybody know is that we are scheduled to be wrapping up today at around about 5 o'clock. So there should be plenty of time for a full engagement. And as Cedric has already said, a recording of this will be made available after the event. So with that, I have the distinct pleasure now of introducing Elizabeth Solomon, who is an enrolled member and board officer of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. She is currently the Assistant Director of Academic Affairs and Fellowship Programs at Harvard School of Public Health. Elizabeth has nearly 30 years of public health experience, including positions in research, project management, and academic affairs at Harvard Chan, as well as positions in management and program development in community-based organizations. Elizabeth is also a member of a number of advisory and management boards, including boards affiliated with the Boston Harbor Islands National Park and the Digital Archive of Native American Petitions in Massachusetts. And we are incredibly thankful and grateful and honored to have Elizabeth here today. And she's gonna kick us off officially and open our event with a land acknowledgement. So Elizabeth, I'm gonna turn it over to you with thanks.
Thank you. We're gathered today in Native space. We are gathered in Native space and on the traditional lands of the Massachusetts tribe. My name is Elizabeth Solomon, and I'm a citizen of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. I welcome you to our land and ask that you treat it as something precious, because it is. When Indigenous peoples in the United States gather together, they traditionally acknowledge and honor the ancestral holders of the land they're meeting on. Many non-Native communities have begun to incorporate this practice in public events, both to honor the Native peoples who belong to the land and to recognize that the use of the lands by others has come as a result of the displacement of the land's original holders. 10,000 years ago, Boston Harbor was dry land, and we were here. 1,000 years ago, much of what is now known as the city of Boston was underwater, and we were here. 400 years ago, English colonists came to occupy our land, and we were here. Today, most of Greater Boston is a major urban area occupied by others, and still we are here. We remember those who came before us, and we prepare for those who will come after us. Here is where our ancestors laughed, cried, loved, made music, practiced our beliefs, shared both food and knowledge, and made both useful and sacred things. Here is where we raised our children and buried and honored our dead. Here is where we continue to live, holding the land and the traditions of our ancestors, and here is where our children's children will continue after us. Many people find it hard to imagine an urban environment as native space, but our connection to this place has not been affected despite thousands of years of both natural and man-made changes to our environment. The landscape is in the process of changing once again, and we will remain. We belong to this place, and no alterations can change this. But what do I mean by native space? You may imagine the sites of former native settlements or maybe some undeveloped land, but know that our sense of place is not limited by perceived boundaries of habitation or ownership. We are part of this place, just as the land, the water, and the sky are part of this place. We are part of this place, just as the plants and animals are part of this place. We are part of this place, just as the wind and the rain are part of this place. Just as these elements are not separable from this place, neither are the Massachusetts people. We do not live in this place, we are of this place. I mentioned earlier the protocol of acknowledging native lands and people, but I challenge non-native peoples and institutions to go beyond verbal land acknowledgements and to consider what it might really mean to honor native space. Honoring native space means acknowledging that everything you do has an effect well beyond your individual lives, that your actions necessarily resonate throughout the larger environment. It means considering your conduct with its broad consequences in mind. Honoring the land means honoring the entire space that we are a part of. It acknowledges our inseparable connectedness with everything else in the world. It acknowledges that everything we do, even the individual breaths that we take, has an effect on everything else. So I honor the directions, I honor the land, I honor the water, I honor the sky. I honor the sun and the moon and the stars. I honor the living things that share this space with us. I honor the ancestors who came before me and those who will come after me. I honor everything that lives now with respect within this space. Crucially, do not imagine that the colonization of this place was something that happened and was completed centuries ago, or that it is currently limited to certain people, places, or practices. The systems that resulted in the colonization of this land and its people are still in place. The colonization of this place and others continues, and we are all complicit in that continued colonization. We continue to colonize when we build so many structures that we cannot see or touch the actual earth, that other living things are permanently displaced, and that rainwater must be diverted far away from the places where it lands. We continue to colonize when we gentrify neighborhoods, not to improve the lives of those who already live there, but rather to displace their homes, their way of life, and their institutions so that we may be more comfortable. We continue to colonize when we ignore or discount the unique knowledge, beliefs, and perspectives of those who do not have the background, education, vocabulary, or resources that we enjoy. We continue to colonize when we work and study and shop in small protected enclaves that separate us from the communities around us. We continue to colonize when we use the community's resources but fail to contribute to its well-being. We continue to colonize anytime we hoard resources for the benefit of the few. These acts of continued colonization are not limited to those of us with power, influence, or riches. This continued colonization is part of a bigger system in which we all participate. Colonization is not a concept. It is a way of being in the world that is dependent upon individual and collective acts of colonization, both large and small. And to the extent that we participate in these colonial structures, each and every one of us is a colonist. One of my requests of you is that as you move through the world, you think about the space that you are in. Remember, wherever you are in the Americas and in much of the larger world, you are in native space and that there are indigenous people who belong to that space. Be mindful how you interact with that space and its people. May all that we do in native spaces both honor the land and prepare the way for all of those to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We're always lucky to have you in our midst. So I'm going to pass things over now to Kelly. And Kelly, I will allow you to introduce yourself and formally begin the panel.
Thanks, Maria. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for opening up this discussion with us being in the right mind and heart space to have this conversation across tribal groups and generations. So again, my name is Kelly Mariko Anoyokpu'ulai Lewis. I'm Native Hawaiian from the island of Maui, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in the School for the Environment. And I'm gonna help moderate our informal conversation today. I'm going to first ask the panelists to go around and introduce themselves, and then I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and Randy to share more about their tribes and the pressing challenges that they're facing. So Sarah, can we get you to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sarah Hazlett. I'm an undergraduate political science major and a double minor in international relations and Native American and Indigenous studies, and I'm also of Seneca descent.
I'm Asa Peters. I'm a first-year student in the Critical Ethnic and Community Studies Master's Program, and I'm a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and also have roots in the Narragansett tribe, and I'm a musician and other things.
Hi, I'm Jane Ann. I'm a fourth-year student at UMass Boston, majoring in English and minoring in secondary education. And I'm of Menominee descent, and I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. Thank you for allowing me into this space.
Thank you, students. I wanted to end with Randy, who's a special guest for us. And I will turn it over to you, Randy.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here with people from across the country and those that are listening from around the world. I'm Randy Verdun, Chief of the Ba'i Lafourche Band of Biloxi Chitimaches. I've served in that capacity since 1996. And it's been a long, long journey, a lot of different, I guess, hurdles that we've had to cross since the beginning. We've had several years of really, really difficult times, especially at the beginning. You know, our elders were really disheartened by the whole process of becoming recognized as a people in a place that people have been forgotten, and that's in South Louisiana. For the most part, we were at the ends of the roads, in the bayous, in the swamps, and nobody really knew existed. We tried to stay out of sight, out of mind. And after so many years of that, realizing that we had to become known, we had to basically expose ourselves and come to the forefront, and especially in a more industrialized world. So we, we started a process in the 90s to kind of come out of the shadows and pursue things that we felt we deserved, and we weren't ashamed of being Indigenous people. So anyway, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to discuss as the panel goes on. But again, I've been in that capacity since 1996, and it's really opened my eyes to a lot of things, especially meeting other people around the country and around the world. Thanks, glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves with all of us. Not sure if Elizabeth or Randy first wanted to go, but we're first going to do a short presentation from representing both of our elders groups.
I've already spoken quite a bit, so why don't we start with Randy?
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Well, I'm usually a man of few words, and your presentation was, well put, and it was extremely nicely done, especially for other people listening, and I can appreciate every word you spoke of. And I'll just give you a little bit of brief history about our struggle, about the origins of our tribe. We're basically Chitimaches in the area between the Mississippi River and Midwest Louisiana. The Chitimaches have been here since the beginning of time in the U.S., in the continental U.S. And prior to the Indian Removal Act, the Biloxi's, which were more near the border of Mississippi and Alabama, migrated west prior to, again, the Indian Removal Act, and became part of the Chitimacha tribe. And that, hence you get the name Baylafouche Band Biloxi Chitimaches. So we became one, and the languages that were spoke here were Chitimacha and Choctaw. And because we intermingled with the French people, we spoke a lot of French. So, we've lived on the ends of the bayous from the earliest of times. We were basically fishermen. We planted, we harvested, we lived off the land like most indigenous peoples around the country. And we avoided being recognized by folks. In fact, early on, many denied their even existence or their native heritage, because acknowledging it or recognizing it or revealing it exposed you to things that you weren't ready to handle or didn't want to handle, wanted to avoid at all costs. Just like many other minorities in the world. So if you can deny it or at least avoid it, you can continue to exist without too much interference or any negative repercussions. So for a long time, we stayed hidden, and I think people were content for the most part. They lived off the land, they trapped, they hunted, they did all the things that would be self-sufficient for themselves, and they wouldn't have to really intermingle with the outside world. But we all know as time goes on, you have to come out the shadows. You have to come out, have to live like everyone else. And I'll talk a little bit about my father. He actually went to school in 1941 when a school was built. He was 11 years old when he started school. His parents had zero education. There wasn't a school for them in our area. So his parents were illiterate, no education whatsoever. They had 9 kids. My dad, one of those. He started school at a late age. And even if he wanted to advance his education into junior high or high school, he wasn't allowed to, because Indians weren't allowed beyond the small school that they had built for them, and that was basically up till the 7th grade. So at best, the generation of my father had a 6th or 7th grade education. So they were basically held at a blue collar, which is okay, but they weren't able to advance into more skilled labor and that sort of thing. So it kind of put us at a really disadvantage, especially the generation of my father, which, you know, many of my aunts and uncles are still around today. And even my dad's youngest siblings are illiterate and struggle. You know, it's hard to be illiterate, not be able to read and write and do those things in today's world. So we've been playing catch up for a long time, especially in my generation. So it's been a real struggle. And what's interesting, when we started pursuing state recognition, a generation ago, my father was Indian enough to be denied benefits. A generation later, we're not Indian enough to be granted benefits. And some of these same folks have the same blood quantum, so that wasn't the change. But it was just a change in mentality that, you know, we were able to use that before. And they try to use that still today, you know. Well, it doesn't work, because we realize that, you know, you just changing the finish line, you just moving the goalposts. So we have to fight, not just for ourselves today, for better education, better healthcare, all the things that we've been denied for so long, that our people have struggled with to try and obtain for their own families and their own kids and their community. And it's not easy, because if you go to legislators, well, you don't need anything special, but they don't realize that we've been trying to catch up. We don't have the skill set to go and apply for grants or do these things and do the things necessary to advance our cause, advance our people's situation, and it makes it really difficult. So it's a real tough situation you find yourselves in, caught between a rock and a hard place, if you will. So anyway, we've struggled for quite a few years, but we started to make headway. Now we started with pursuing the state recognition, and that too, because you're going up against legislators which are not Indigenous peoples for the most part. So it took us 3 sessions to get it passed, and the session that deals with these types of situations are every other year, and every other year the fiscal matters. So we went the first time, and of course we were denied because, and I think we can all relate to this, well, all you wanted state recognition for is to pursue casinos, right? Or, you know, you trying to get a leg up on somebody else, and that's not always the case. We were trying to pursue state recognition so that we can get better benefits for our people, both education, both healthcare, senior citizens care, and the things that we deserve. So they denied us because they said, well, you're just pursuing state recognition for casinos. So we had to go back 2 years later, and again, the same situation, the same people. But this time there was a mix because the Louisiana oil and gas companies, they figured that they were going to interfere with our recognition prospects because we were just trying to regain the land that had been stolen from us. And so they were there in opposition. So it actually took us 3 different times, and the last one, we were able to get it done. So I guess the message in that is, it doesn't matter how long it takes to get something done. If you know it's possible, and if you know other people have achieved it, never give up. Because if we would have stopped at the second attempt, we wouldn't be state recognized today. So the message is never give up on your goals and your dreams, or on your aspirations, and on doing the best that you can to forward and help your people succeed. And you know, we're still in that struggle because yes, we've obtained state recognition, which gives you a little bit more leverage. But until you get the federal recognition, you really don't get the benefits that other tribes get around the country. And that is mainly in education and all the other things that I previously mentioned. So we're in that process, and that too is a long process. We began in '96, and we're still pursuing that today. It's not an easy prospect or process. You have criteria you have to meet, and you have to hire genealogists, anthropologists. You have to hire all these professionals, and that's it can be several $100,000 to pursue. And when you come from a community that's really poor, it's hard to do it with little to no funds. So you have to rely on people that are stepping forward and willing to give you a hand to make progress. So we're in that process now. We've had some really good volunteers, both anthropologists, genealogists, and people that have come forward. Even other people, and I'll throw a thank you out to Sarah's parents. They've been instrumental in helping us pro bono, and that's really appreciated. So I guess the long and the short of it is, it's a long process. Never give up. Always keep in mind that you have people that will stand behind you and support you every step of the way. And it's sad to say that this process takes so long, because when we started, we had elders in our community, and they were really wanted to see this through because they wanted better for their kids and grandkids and great grandkids. And since we started, we've probably lost probably half of our elders because they were already in their 70s, and 20 years later, they're 90s or in their 80s and 90s, and they start passing away, never having achieved what they set out to achieve. And it's sad because the process shouldn't take that long, but it does. And I guess one of my wishes and hopes and dreams is that the process can be much quicker for people coming behind us in their pursuits for recognition. And there's no reason why it should take this long. So I guess the bottom line is, again, thank you so very much for me being able to share just a little snippet of what we go through. As far as, and I don't know, I guess we can do this when we go into the more discussions about the climate change and some of the things that we deal with as a tribe. I do have some slides that I'd like to present, show, because it really tells a tale of the changes we've experienced here on the Gulf Coast, and I know on the East Coast and West Coast, and everywhere across this country, people have different things that occur to them, and ours is unique to our area, but everyone has basically the same sort of struggles, things that evolve and change that have a negative effect on our existence. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think everyone would be really interested in looking at those photos too. So we'll definitely make sure there's time for that. Elizabeth, take it over.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing, Randy. I'm always struck when there's a panel of folks from different Native tribes, when we kind of hear about how many things we have in common, despite the fact that we're from different areas and may have different individual struggles, but that there are so many things that are similar. And one of the things that really resonated with me was the fact of really kind of becoming invisible, intentionally invisible. And really kind of, that's something that certainly was experienced by my tribe and my family. And unfortunately, I don't know if this is something that's come up for you, but it has then now become a reason to question our legitimacy. So I think there's some of the things that we do just to survive really then become questionable in terms of, okay, are you actually a legitimate tribe? So I think our struggle around recognition is very different, simply because in the state of Massachusetts, there is no formal way to receive state recognition. So that's something that's a bit problematic. And the question remains is like, are there any state recognized tribes? And if so, what they are. So there are two things in the state of Massachusetts. There's the Mass Commission of Indian Affairs, which years ago made a determination about which tribes and tribal groups were eligible for state benefits, the biggest one of which is basically free tuition at state colleges, which at this point is not worth as much because the fees are much higher than the tuition. So, so there's that mechanism. And then in the, I believe it was in the 70s, the governor actually, so this wasn't necessarily state recognition, but the governor at the time made a proclamation about certain tribes who the state, quote, recognized. I don't know if it was really a recognition. Unfortunately, the Massachusetts were not part of that. And so we've had a struggle since in terms of, are there tribes, any tribes that are state recognized? And if there are some and we are not, there is no mechanism for us to become state recognized. So that's sort of one of the issues. And honestly, there's not a huge benefit actually in terms of being a state recognized tribe in the state of Massachusetts. So that unlike what you were talking about, Randy, I think that there's not, we've kind of struggled back and forth in terms of whether that's something that we want to pursue or not. I think one of the issues that's very different for us in terms of, we're in a major urban area. And because we're in a major urban area, we are, we're not the only, the local tribes that are from here are not the only tribal people that are here. And so we are sharing space, not just with the multiple tribes that originated in Massachusetts, but also with people from other tribal groups. And there frequently isn't a lot of contact among us. And so sometimes we can be working at cross purposes, which is unfortunate. And that's not, I don't think that's anybody's fault. It's just that there's times when it's very difficult for different groups to get together. And honestly, the concerns of local tribes may be very different than those of the people who have come to settle here. And I plan to talk about some other things, but this was sort of a difficult a day for me because there are a number of things that came up that were very distressing for me as a tribal member of the Massachusetts tribe. So one of them, people may be aware that there was a march on Saturday around the Columbus and the state flag. And so despite the fact that this was held in Boston, and Boston is in Massachusetts territory, none of the organizers contacted us to participate in that. So that is problematic. So we are dealing with issues of invisibility and erasure, not just among the dominant society, but sometimes around other Native people. So that's one of the things we struggle with. The other thing is that we often have issues in terms of with the state flag and seal, sometimes with the mascot issue. The mascot issue, I think that's an issue that is across all tribal groups. So I don't think that's such a big deal, but certainly around the Massachusetts flag and seal, frequently the folks that are talking about that, or the people who are discussing this, are not necessarily people who are from the tribes that are here. So again, we can be marginalized in our own territory based on, you know, some of the things that are happening, and that happens. So there was, for instance, there was a piece on WGBH on Friday that was about the Natick Seal. Natick Mass's has a seal that includes John Eliot, who was a preacher in the 1600s, whose job he took it upon himself to that his calling was to convert Native people to Christianity. And so the Natick Seal shows John Eliot standing, preaching before 3 seated Indian men. And a number of the white residents in Natick are pushing to change the seal, which is not necessarily a bad thing. However, there's been limited contact with us. There's been some. This was undertaken without basically prior consultation with the Native communities, who are the descendant communities from that area. And additionally, what happened is there was a reporter that went out to report on that. And the only people that actually that actually spoke on that were 3 white people from Natick, and then a person who is an Indigenous person, but is not from the area. So again, this something that, and my tribe has very close ties to Natick, as does Nipmuc. And so here we have a case in which something that is really something that's part of our heritage, that is very close to us, in which we are excluded. Now, I'm not saying we're intentionally excluded. However, that things are happening in our community around that really affect us actually aren't really being discussed with us. So I would say, honestly, that's probably one of our biggest challenges right now, is really trying to, in a major urban area where there are many constituencies, really making sure that local Indigenous issues are front and center. And that that they're front and center, that are being brought front and center and being discussed by local Native communities. So that's not to say that other people don't have things to say about that. They do, they welcome it, but that there really needs to be a lot more reaching out to the local and local Native communities, and being in relationship with us, so that we aren't working at cross purposes. Randy, you talked a little bit about federal recognition. I mean, that's not even in the cards for us at this point. It's not, first of all, it's not clear that the tribe hasn't made a decision that's something that we even want to do. But certainly we're not in a position to do that at this point, even if we wanted to. You're absolutely correct that the amount of money and effort that it takes is really, really huge. And that in and of itself is problematic, that we are required to prove who we say we are to the people who actually invaded our land, stole it away, and tried to kill us off. So I personally have real problems with asking those folks for federal recognition. That's my personal opinion. That's not necessarily the opinion of my tribe, but it's like, kind of like, why would I, you know? And there are a lot of things that go in terms of federal oversight that may not necessarily be what you want in terms of, you know, your land, you know, how you use your money, things like that. So, I mean, it's something that's a real discussion within our tribe about that. Is that something that at some point in the future we might want to move towards, but that's not something that we're someplace that we're at right now. I did want to talk a little bit about climate change. And it's interesting because I am working with some folks from the Dominant Society that are working on issues of climate change. And one of the main frustrations that I have is that it is so short-sighted. So what most groups are looking at is what we can do to mitigate what's happening in the next 10, 20, 30, maybe if we're lucky, 50 years. And honestly, that's not an Indigenous way of looking at things. So we should not be looking at how we can mitigate in 20 years. Not that we should pay attention to that, but that we really need to start thinking about what's 100, 200, 300 years in the future, and what do we need to do to kind of make sure that everybody is able to kind of not just survive, but thrive with what is changing in our environment. So I think while we think about climate change in terms of what's happening in our specific community, I think we also look at it as this is something that's going to affect everybody in the world. So it's not just that it's, there are things that are happening in individual communities that are really important, but really this is something that none of us can tackle completely on our own. We have to kind of come together to figure out ways to tackle that. And the idea that somehow in Boston, one of the things is sort of coastal resilience. And the idea that we can actually have some hope of stopping the ocean is like the height of folly to me. That's not to say we don't kind of like figure out how we kind of mitigate things in the meantime. One of the things I said before in the land acknowledgement is 10,000 years ago, Boston Harbor was dry land. It's not dry land anymore. The Boston Harbor Islands were not islands. They basically were, not to go into the technical term, but were hills. So honestly, the idea that there's anything that we could do in the long term that will actually mitigate stuff so that the coast stays intact the way it is craziness. So to be looking at stuff in a 10, 20, 30, 50 year time frame, instead of thinking about what might be happening in 200 years and what we might be have to do in terms of mitigate the forces that are actually driving the change, as opposed to figuring out, okay, this change is coming, how do we make sure that whatever is happening, we can address it in some way. And the other thing that comes up around that is really like who benefits from that? Who is benefiting from the idea of having coastal resilience? Who's on the coast? I mean, there are some Native communities on the coast. There are some communities that are not, quote, economically advantaged. But for the most part, who's on the coast are the people that have the most money. And so who is this mitigation for? So really to kind of think about when we talk about climate change and what we do about climate change, to really think not just about the short run, to really think about the long run, to think about, okay, what does this mean in the long term? What can we do now to make sure that it doesn't get any worse than we already know it's going to get? And then also to make sure that whoever benefits from whatever we do, that benefit goes across the board, and that it is not just for the folks who have the money, the power, or the influence. So that's all. That's probably a lot to say, so I think I'll stop now.
Thank you for that. I mean, as the oceanographer scientist, these are the things I think about, especially of how do we bring in, what is our role as Indigenous people, as stewards of the places that we inhabit. I did want to open it up just for an informal conversation. So Sarah, Jane, Asa, feel free to jump in with questions or additional comments.
I just kind of have a more general question for the both of you. How do you guys look at climate change being a sort of transsectional oppression of communities who have been gentrified. I had the privilege of receiving a presentation from Loren Spears of the Narragansett tribe, and she touched on how climate change can affect communities in regards to gentrification and food shortages and those kinds of things. What are guys' thoughts on that kind of area? It's a very widespread question, so feel free to answer what you feel comfortable with, but that's something that I would like to learn more about.
Well, I don't want to monopolize. So Randy, if you have something to say, I want to like make sure you have a chance to get a word in, because you said you're a man of not a lot of words, and I'm a woman of a lot of words. So so I will make it short. I think that one of the things that's interesting in terms of if you start thinking about climate change and neighborhoods and gentrification, that one of the things that we really aren't talking about is what might happen when we actually do have to move. I mean, some people call it retreat, some people call it relocation, whatever. So, but how is that going to affect not just the communities that have to move, but the communities that are being moved into? And really kind of thinking about, okay, how can we make sure that this happens in a way that doesn't disadvantage people, that doesn't result in a pushback or a backlash. How do we think about that? And so a lot of it is like really kind of issues of equity and environmental justice, and how do we kind of think about that ahead of time so that we don't get to a crisis and kind of go, okay, how do we deal with this now? I think really one of the things that I heard recently that I found really fascinating is for when people are thinking about climate change and, say relocation or mitigation, to instead of thinking about the monetary value of something, think about really who's most affected. So that kind of switches the thinking about, okay, are we going to protect the seaport, which just got built up with, multi-million dollars or multi-trillion dollars of, high rises and whatever. Like those are the things that are probably the most expensive, but sorry, everybody who built there knew that this was coming. So are we gonna put resources towards protecting that? Or are we going to put resources toward protecting the places that are going to be the most impacted in it and that don't have the resources to kind of move? And also really just, and I'm not sure that this answers your question, but honestly, I think that we can't just think about the actual effects of the climate, but what we tend to do in the dominant society is to separate different things into different, little areas, and we do that in academia also. It's okay, so you have this thing about climate change, you have this thing about social justice, you have this thing about, urban development. It's all connected. And if we don't start thinking about how to connect everything, then we're gonna be again scrambling to figure out how to solve these problems.
I'll add something as far as my thoughts. And you brought up some really, really good points. Society has to be adaptive because some things we can't change. Some things, we've had climate change since the beginning of time. We've had the Ice Age. We weren't around to have an effect on the climate back then. So even though, yes, there are things we can do to mitigate some things are not going to change. It is not static. It's not going to be the same today, tomorrow, and 100 years from now. It's dynamic. Things change. So how do you have to be you have to be adaptive. And unless you realize that and understand that things are going to change and adjust for those changes, you're subject to fail, or at least be exposed to where you will have problems. And I'm just going to throw this out, case in point. Where I live, by Lafourche, we've been building a levee system probably since the 60s. And then the neighboring communities, we actually have several bands of Biloxi Chitimaches where I live. We're the easternmost on Bay Lafourche, and you have two others or three others further west. We were fortunate enough that we began a levee system. That levee system extends, thankfully, below the settlement area where our community started, from the earliest times, from the mid to late 1800s, where we had migrated to, and started migrating up the bayou because of the water rising and the exposure to hurricanes and those kinds of things. So we actually moved further north in 1961 when I was 2 years old. Others did not, because they were dealing with, we're trappers, we're fishermen, we need to stay close to where we do those things, so they stayed. But again, they built a levee system that protected us. And even today, they're building the levee higher. And then you contrast that to the other the other three communities to our west. They don't have a levee system. And when the hurricanes come, they're devastated, they're wiped out. And again, I'm going to go back to the comparison. In our community, we had people come in and build homes for people that had lost their homes. In our community, we built a house, and the elevation of the home only needed to be 40 inches above grade because we were within a protection levee. Just west of us, two of the other homes that were built in two of the other communities, tribal communities, they were built 14 feet and 16 feet above grade because they had no levee protection. So again, now they're starting to build levees in the other communities because they realize unless we do, we're just going to have to continue building these homes higher and higher off the ground so that they don't get flooded. And then you add another problem to the mix. You have seniors that are having to climb flight of stairs, 14 feet up. And so they really need an elevator. And that's a whole other can of worms. But I'll just give you the mentality of people at our state capitol. Well, why don't you just build a ramp to get to the top? Well, based on code, that ramp would have to be probably 60, 80 feet long and wrap around the thing several times before you get to the top. So their solution makes no sense, but to them in their mind, well, that's what you do. You build a ramp. So that wasn't possible. So we had to come up with some other creative ways to assist elderly people climbing up those stairs. So anyway, the bottom line is, we have to be adaptive. We have to be ready for change. And if we're not, we'll be caught or we'll be left behind. So the best thing we can do is do the best that we can as a people, as a society, to mitigate what we can control. Whole corporations, whole industries responsible for what they do. And that is, and again, I'm gonna refer to the pics I'm gonna show when we have an opportunity, but it shows what happens when industry is not responsible, what happens 40, 50, 60 years later when they neglect addressing something that could have been addressed easily, but they don't, and then it becomes a catastrophic environmental nightmare, and which you can't reverse, you can't fix now because it's beyond repair. But had they taken the few steps when they did it, they could have protected thousands of acres of property, which is now basically uninhabitable. You can't do anything with it, and it's basically marshlands. So it's being responsible and being adaptive is my my point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Actually, could we take a look at those pictures now, since we're on this conversation of climate change? And
I'm going to try and share the screen.
Looks great, Randy.
Perfect.
Looks great.
Okay, I'm gonna the first picture. Let me see if I can get back to the beginning. This picture here was an aerial photograph taken by USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. And if you look in the top left corner, it's got a date stamp 11/15/1940. The red dot is just a reference so that when we go through them, because the pictures were not taken from the exact same location in the air, I'll put a red dot on each of them so you can see the reference. And in this picture back, 1940, there's a small canal that runs to the left of the screen. And this picture is basically north is top, south, east, and west. So this tiny canal runs to the west. So you can see a reference of how small it was. And that was basically for people that traveled from, do y'all see my pointer when I move it?
yes, we can see it.
Okay, they would travel from Baye-Lafourche here and go all the way into this lake, which would ultimately take them to some of the communities further west. So if I go to the next one, which is 1953, if you look at the canal, you see it's getting larger. And I'll go back just so you can see. Okay, and at the top again, there's a date stamp 1953. So you see it's becoming more populated, and then these canals that shoot off of Plaisance Canal were places where they started to drill for oil. All these cuts that were taken through here were all for oil exploration, where you didn't see a whole lot of them here. Okay, so I'm going to advance again to 1957, and you see these canals getting even larger. And I'll go up to 1980, and you see all of these canals that have grown larger and larger and becoming more and more plentiful. Every time they went out and drilled for oil, they would find another branch and drill and drill and drill. And what happens when you start doing this and you don't resolve environmentally what was there, you don't fix what was there, they should have closed these canals once they completed their drilling, exploration, and not allowed salt water to intrude. And once you get saltwater intrusion into the marsh, you start killing the vegetation, which holds the ground together, and then it starts falling apart and falling off into the Gulf, into the marsh. Now this is a current aerial photograph of that same area. So you see the red dot. The canal is so wide, and all these places, there's nothing left but small pieces of land which is not inhabitable, and it's all marshland. But all this green stuff is now water, and whereas before that was still solid earth. So because they were irresponsible and didn't leave it as they found it, even though you're drilling and pulling resources out the ground, had they closed off the canals they dug to get to the oil, this here would still be property that would be usable, and a buffer between populations and the Gulf of Mexico when hurricanes come ashore, when water comes ashore because of the hurricanes. And I'll just show you real quick in this. this is a levee system that they built around the parish. And this is the slither of property that's still left to where people can inhabit, whereas before it was much larger. It was much larger area where people could settle, grow crops, raise cattle, and so on and so forth. In fact, this picture here, some of our people actually lived in the area here, where today it's no longer inhabitable. So anyway, I just wanted to show that to you. These are some of our folks. I'll just throw that out real quick. It's a couple of pictures I had. This is probably the early 1900s. This picture was in 1907. Anyway, if anyone has any questions, feel free. Was that helpful?
Very helpful. And I can't believe you could see such clear and distinguishable changes over that time, and for it to be directly linked with people not understanding the earth or talking to the indigenous groups there. That's crazy. Sarah or Asa, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I was actually wondering how these most recent hurricanes have impacted y'all down there.
Yeah, we've been really, really fortunate. The last 3 storms that came ashore, we were right in its path initially, and fortunately, the 2 of them went to the west of us. The other one went toward Alabama. But a storm of that magnitude, if it would have hit directly over Lafourche Parish, and I'd mentioned earlier that we are adding to the levee, bringing up the levee system to make it hard to be more, offer more protection from more severe hurricanes, because the levees can be breached. And once they're breached, it's hard to fix it when you have the water coming in. It's just impossible. Then you basically get a New Orleans effect, because you basically have a bowl and water fills in, and there's not a whole lot you can do. Now, in the other communities south of Houma, those communities don't have a levee system. In fact, someone mentioned earlier about the relocation. I think it was Elizabeth, about relocation. We have one tribe that's basically, they don't have anything left, so they've been trying to relocate them for 4 or 5 years. They have the property, the whole 9 yards, but red tape involved slows everything down. So they're so vulnerable. Most of the folks that live there have raised their own homes that have been there, since the 40s or 50s, maybe even earlier. They've lifted their homes to 14 feet. So again, they've become more adaptive. So when the waters come in, their homes aren't flooded completely, and not everything's a loss. But it could have been really, really bad had we had a direct hit, with flooding, with the winds and everything else, because these homes aren't built. They're not superstructures, and like I said, in most cases, these houses have been lifted. So it's not like they were built to withstand storms that we get today. And I will mention this, I mentioned it earlier about the homes that we had built. I think it was 5 homes we had built. These homes were designed to withstand a certain miles per hour wind load. And after, I think it was one of the last storms that hit directly there after Katrina. These storms were built right after Katrina. Other homes that sustained damage, but these homes that were specially designed for this wind load, the wind load of a hurricane, they were still intact. So it proved to us that yes, we can build something that can sustain, these kinds of storms, but it's going to take time and it's going to take money. So anyway, hopefully I answered your question, Sarah.
Asa, did you want to comment on anything or bring anything up?
Just on the topic of sea level rise, and just how climate change in general, kind of the meaning of its impact on Indigenous communities. I was I came across a YouTube video recently that was showing, sea level rise in Massachusetts coastline, and just kind of showing, okay, 5 meters, this is the recession of the land, and 10 meters. And I know that there are models which cover, based on our current path, what the rise will be. And I know that it's kind of an exponential thing. So as Elizabeth was talking about, we need to look more far in advance. It's pretty concerning to even imagine what 200 years or even 100 years from now will look like. And as Randy said, like, there is change that's going to happen. And I guess it is just a matter of how we're able to respond to it. I also think something that I feel like it could be viewed as a dark thought, but I think are both, sort of science in academic sense, as well as a lot of our traditional stories tell us that there was a time before us being here as humans. And I would expect that there will be a time after us being here as humans. And I think, I think I would encourage everyone to look at that, that really big picture change of what goes on this planet, to look at that change in a healthy and a healthy way, because it's just a fact, like, things are always changing, and, we'll never be here forever. But it would be really tragic if one of the big things that contributes to that change that kind of causes, our human experience to change on a fundamental level, it would be very tragic if it was for a reason that is like full of so many really unfortunate and disgusting power dynamics and the legacies of those dynamics. All this overdevelopment that's leading to these problems can all be traced back to greed and exploitation of people and land. So yeah, I guess I just feel like things will always change, and that, there's going to be a time where, it will be time to let go of, I really don't want to sound dark by that. I just feel like you have to look at those things really maturely. Like, that's the big picture arc of this world and of life, but at the same time, I think it would be very tragic if, such horrible inequalities and things like that impact Indigenous people all around the world are part of the same system that leads to that. So I agree, we should do everything we can to respond and just stop going in this direction that's led us here.
Thanks for saying that. I agree with you. So one of the things I want to say is that the Earth will survive. The question is whether we will. So really, I mean, we've had, mass extinctions in the past. The Earth is still here, and we could, what we're doing now is fundamentally changing the environment. The environment has changed at times in the long distant history, as you said, before there were any people, when the majority of the Earth was covered with water, and we may be going back to that. And the question is, what is humans' place in that? Will we continue to have a place in that? And that's what we're really talking about now. Are we going to have a place in that? Are the other creatures that now live with us here, what will their place be? And so I don't think we have to worry about the Earth as a whole going away. It's not going to go away. We might. And so really that's what I feel is at stake. Us as humans and other animals and plants that may not survive what we are doing to the environment. And so I've said, to be even darker than you are, Asa, in terms of this, is saying that, maybe honestly, it might not be, if we keep going in this direction as humanity as a whole, and we cannot get back to the idea that we are part, that that we are not separate from the earth. This is something that the dominant culture, we tend to kind of, and we're all part of the dominant culture in some way or another, that we have this idea that somehow we exist separately from the earth. We don't. And until we can get back to that, then if we can't reset and think about, okay, how we are a part of it as opposed to separate from it, how we fit into the earth as opposed to how we want to dominate the earth, then maybe the extension of humanity is not so bad. So I mean, that honestly, you know, kind of, I think we're at a point where we have to kind of think, what are we doing? What do we need to do in the future? And how can we make sure that we are living in good reciprocal relationship with everything else here? Because we aren't right now.
I appreciate you, Elizabeth, and Asa, you as well. And Asa, it wasn't that dark. I think it was real. Because one thing I don't want to do, and I don't believe you sound like you want to as well, nor does Elizabeth, nor does anyone, is plant fear in anyone, because I don't think we should necessarily fear the change that may or may not come, because we don't know exactly. So I don't want people to go around, and I don't do this with my kids, and I have 10 grandkids, by the way, and I don't try and instill any fear in them as far as thinking about the future and what the future holds, you know, because we can do, like Elizabeth said, we coexist and we do the best we can, we do our part, but even that might not be enough. And if it's not, I don't want us to feel guilty about it, but I don't want us to be fearful of the future either. And we need to become cognizant of the fact that we can be as adaptive as we can be, and do the best we can, and then we go forward and don't beat ourselves up because we fell short, because we are just a handful, and even in this country we're just a handful of people in a world of billions and billions of folks, and we can do our part. But unless everybody does their part and make a concerted effort, you know, what we do right here over our front, our property, our yard, whatever, the earth turns. What I burn in my yard is going in the neighbor's yard, and he might not like it, but it's just the way it is. So unless all countries participate in, we need to do the right thing for humanity, what we decide to do is going to help 25% of the earth, 15, 20%, whatever it is. So their air gets 15, 20% cleaner. But unless they're doing their part, that little bit doesn't really impact the whole world like we would all hope it would. So, you know, that's talking, you know, grandiose, because we know that's difficult to accomplish, but you know, it's something that we ought to all be aware of. We ought to all be responsible for what we do, and I don't care which country you're in. But you know, when you're dealing with industry, when you're dealing with the almighty dollar, or whatever form of monetary system you have, when you're dealing with money, you know, sometimes any and everything else becomes second fiddle, and it doesn't matter. And they're not thinking very far in the future. They're thinking to the end of their nose, and that's about as far as it goes, because what they see is what's in their hand. And to me, that would be selfish, because you don't care about your kids, your grandkids, you don't care about the future. And I think we ought to all be responsible, and I think that goes from individuals all the way up to industry. And you know, you do the best thing you can do, and you do the right thing. And I think far too often we don't do the right thing. And until we change as individuals, as humans, you know, things may not get better. but I'm not going to be fearful about it. We just got to do the best we can. I was going dark there. Sorry.
Thank you. I do see we're coming close to 4:50, and I wanted to see if any panelists wanted to have leave any parting thoughts or comments on our conversation before we turn it over to Maria.
I think it's fine to turn it over. I mean, I think this has been a really good conversation, and I appreciate everyone who has asked questions, and Randy, who's provided a lot of context, and we a lot of things we are similar. I think we're pretty much all of us, I think, are pretty much on the same page, basically. So, Randy?
Yes, I really enjoyed it. Sorry I got blocked out. I'm in a motel room. I think I mentioned that earlier, and I lost power. So the outlet in this new hotel didn't have power, so it basically died on me. So anyway, I would like to continue this at some time in the future. If you guys want to do this again, I'd be more than willing and happy to do it again. I'd be a little bit more prepared. I've been on the road for a few days, but I do appreciate the invitation, and I enjoy talking with each and every one of you fine folks. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm going to jump in and, echo the thank yous. And I just want to thank you, Kelly, for doing such a great job of moderating. As you can tell, we are incredibly lucky at UMass Boston with our students. So I'm going to do my best now to kind of give an overview and summary of some of the questions that have come in. I do want to apologize to all the audience members who have posed questions if we don't get to your questions. It's not because we don't love you. There just have been far too many for the time that we have left. There have been 20-something questions altogether, and all of them have been incredible. So I'm going to try and cluster some of them together. I'm just going to pose a few at the start and then, pick and choose as you like, basically. So there have been a couple of questions clustered together around what I think are sort of ongoing political struggles. We had a couple of audience members who asked specifically about what's happening right now in terms of changing the Massachusetts state flag and the seal. Similarly, wanting a little bit more sort of from you, Randy, if you'd care to speak to this about potentially current political struggles ongoing around voter suppression for local, state, and federal elections, and whether the illiteracy that you sort of referred to with some of your community has historically or, in the present kind of posed any challenges as far as voting goes. We also had a very good question about tribal sovereignty in general and, thoughts and reflections on, why and how this is so kind of significant and at the forefront of Indigenous political struggles. So thinking about sovereignty specifically. So I'm just going to leave those, and then there's a whole next section of questions about specifically environmental issues. Sorry, so we can address the political first, and then jump to the environmental specifically.
As far as politics, that can be that can get really intense. But I'll suffice to say that regardless of what your political persuasions are, I believe we have the best country on the face of the planet because we can make a choice. Some places don't have that opportunity. They're not given that freedom. And so I like capitalism, and there's some things I don't like particularly about capitalism. I like a free market. But again, and we'll echo back what we talked about earlier, when you have a free market, when you have laws, you have to have people that are responsible, because if people are responsible for what they do and the impact of what I do or you do or anybody else does as it affects somebody else, if we were always aware of that impact, you wouldn't need any laws, because people wouldn't need to be told, don't do this because it has a negative effect on your neighbor or your community or your state or your country. So the reason we have laws is because not everybody is as pure as the wind-driven snow. And it's just human nature that we will take advantage of someone if we can. So industry does that. If we had a society that truly cared about each other, you wouldn't even have a political party or two or three different political parties. So I guess my point is, we're not perfect people. We tend to come from two different perspectives typically, and I guess there's positives and negatives on both sides, and even an independent, you get squeezed in the middle, and it's just difficult to determine exactly where I fall. But I'm going to lean more toward a capitalist, a conservative, because there are some things that I believe that that some would not. So, you're asking a tough question when you start putting politics in the mix. And as far as the election process, it's really, really trying times today because of the COVID, and because of all the dynamics that have played into this. Where I don't care which side you're on, there's going to be some problems that are going to probably arise that both sides will have a problem with. And again, we're dealing with human nature, and hopefully this too we can get past, and we can get through this election process, and we can get through this COVID pandemic, and go on about our lives as we had before. So I don't know if I answered that question exactly or clearly, but if you want to ask it in a different way, I'll do my best to respond.
Oh, that's great, Randy. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, did you want to chime in at all?
I'll be really quick in terms of, because I noticed there were a couple of questions about the state flag and seal, and the status is that it is passed in the Senate, and it is kind of stuck in the House. And so for folks who are interested in doing some action around that, you can get in touch with your state rep and express your opinions about that. And I'm gonna not talk about some other stuff so you can get to some other questions.
All right, thank you so much, Elizabeth. So a next kind of cluster of questions, I think, have all gravitated around themes of sort of being good allies and how to act in solidarity with Indigenous politics, and the interests and the projects of tribes in local contexts. So we have some questions specifically about very local developments to UMass Boston. So the Bayside Project, if you've got any thoughts on that, Elizabeth. There's also obviously work that's going on around the Boston Harbor Islands, and a question about how integral are Native peoples and frameworks to the thinking and the initiatives that have been proposed there. Similarly with the Dorchester Bay City development. And then for you, Randy, a question sort of thinking about good allyship in terms of what neighboring tribes have done sort of in solidarity with your tribe, and how that has sort of come together, any kind of intertribal initiatives that might have happened locally. And then just a final sort of, I guess, forward-looking perspective in terms of thinking about work that's yet to be done, because I think that's one big takeaway that I am sort of going to carry with me from this conversation, is that we all have work to do. Somebody asked a question about what folks who are kind of in the sort of nonprofit world can do to really lend their support to Indigenous struggles. and figuring out ways to be good allies, some of the most efficient and ethical ways of contributing towards the struggles of Indigenous peoples vis-a-vis the environment. And then for our younger members of the panel, a final question as well, asking what, from the perspective of young people within Indigenous communities, are some of the most urgent and important things on your minds in terms of actionable things.
So I'm cognizant of the time, and unless we're going to go over 5, I want to turn it over to the last question, because Randy and I have had a lot of time to talk, but the other folks on the panel haven't.
That sounds good. I think we can take a couple of minutes if you are all willing to stay just a little bit beyond 5 o'clock until like about 5 past or something. But yeah, great idea. Why don't we start with our students? So that final question about sort of what's at the forefront of conversations that you're having with your peers about the sorts of issues that we've been talking about today.
So I think for me personally, and I know I speak about this with like my peers, and me and Sarah have had conversations loosely based around this with a lot of other ideas intermingling, but access to education and healthcare, those are rights, they're human rights, and basically just getting the message out there that this is a really big problem, not only in the Indigenous community, but beyond, and that they're in today's society, they're things that people need to survive and be like, I mean, obviously healthcare, but access to education is very important, something that I'm really passionate about, and that is just one big issue that I think educating yourself and like being aware surrounding politics, Indigenous and nationally, is like very important. So,
thanks, Jane
For me, I was just gonna kind of like turn the question back kind of onto myself, because I feel like I'm a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, but I've spent a lot of my life living in other places in New England. So for me, and I maybe in general, for our communities, especially youth-wise, I feel like, I can see my own shortcomings or things that I don't know enough about my own community and culture. And so I think a really pressing thing that I want to take upon myself, but also maybe just for all upcoming generations of Indigenous communities, is to really try to cement how we can keep cultural engagement and passing on. Tradition is always changing and adapting with the times and responding to things, so what can we as young people do to learn more about our own communities and be able to pass that on to anyone who comes after us.
Thank you, Asa. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
I kind of just want to go off of what Jean said. There's a lot of misinformation out there about Indigenous people in this country. And so that's something that I've encountered a lot and that I try to like combat in my day-to-day life. So I would say that's one of my like most pressing issues, is just like having people be aware of Indigenous struggles and what all is going on in like current Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, and then with the 3 minutes that we have left, Elizabeth and Randy, if you have any closing thoughts.
So I do, and I'll be short. I think in answer to whether Native communities have been involved in the processes that are happening, the short answer is no. The things that we have gotten involved in is because we have pushed our way in. And so I think, and that's problematic, particularly around the Harbor Islands, which are very important to the Massachusetts people, but for all people, all Indigenous people who are from Massachusetts. those are one of some of the few places that are actually pretty much undeveloped, and there's a lot of talk about developing them, and that's really problematic. And our voices are not being heard around that. I think one of the questions was, how can people be in, how can allies help? And really, and this is true not just for allies, but for anybody and for whoever, in terms of trying to think about why we're not in these conversations, is because we're not in relationship with folks. We need to be in relationship with each other. It's not enough to kind of call somebody and say, okay, can you give me some input about this, that, or the other thing, but really kind of building lasting relationships between Indigenous people and other groups and within Indigenous and within and between Indigenous groups. That really, it's all about relationship. It's not, you can't keep thinking about things as being transactional anymore if we're going to get anything done.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Randy, any closing thoughts?
Sure. I had a couple of questions here. Hopefully, I'll maybe address a couple of them that I just looked at. One of them is with the voter suppression of especially our people that are illiterate. No, we have typically there's always an extended family that these individuals either live with or live next to. We're a fairly close community as far as familial relationships and bonds. So there's usually sufficient assistance for those folks to either register or vote. And so we've not experienced any concerns that we've had to address. So that's been really, really good for us because we're a close-knit community. As far as the state recognition, someone asked about the steps. Basically, it's little evidence is required, but you always try and present as much as you can. You have to show legitimacy. You have to show that you exist. You have to show in some general way your genealogy and that sort of thing. So there are some things that you want to present, but not necessarily required. So to make it short and brief, it's just a legislative process, and you have to convince legislators to vote either yay or nay for you. And so it takes basically politicking and talking to your representatives and senators, because it's typically in our state, it's a concurrent resolution, which means the House and the Senate have to vote up or down. So it's a little bit of a process, but if you have it within your state, it can be achieved. Again, thank you all for allowing me to be here. It's been really enjoyable for me. Hopefully it has been for you. Sarah, thank you. Thank you all for doing this for us, because it gives us a voice. But we also have the students that have logged in to listen. It gives them an opportunity to see what goes on outside the classroom in the rural world. And if anyone ever wants to come down to Louisiana and visit, we'll be more than happy to accommodate that visit. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy. And so we are officially over time, so I'm going to wrap things up now and just express enormous thank you once again to all of you for being our panelists in this incredible conversation. The thank yous are just pouring in the chat. I just want you to all know that, and much gratitude for the collective wisdom of the group. And thank you as well to those of you who have tuned in. We know it's a busy day with lots going on. So we look forward to putting this up on YouTube. Cedric, any final words before we log off?
One thing I can't believe I neglected at the beginning, I would like to thank our new chancellor who made this possible. Thank you, Chancellor Orozco.
Indeed, indeed. We are very grateful for his support. And there will be more UMass Boston Indigenous People Day events in the forthcoming weeks. So just check our websites for announcements about those, and we'll catch you there. So thank you again.